Now, next I want to show you an example of using an external style sheet. And here's one. It's very similar to the one before. It has a rule which states that the H1 headings should have a color of red, be in a font size of 3 EM, and the font face of Arial. And that's a simple style sheet here. I've called it into the Opera browser here just so you can see it. It displays as text. If you just load the style sheet in like that, it's meaningless to a browser unless you tell the browser what to do with it. And that's what the next file here is. This is the import styles.htm file in the downloadable archive. And here we have another web page. The title here, importing a style sheet. And the body here has the H1 text, but there's no style. There's no style within these style tags, just an import command. It begins with an @ symbol and then the keyword import, and then we tell it what to import, which is the URL with the name styles.css. So there you go, that's this file here, styles.css, and we're telling the browser to import it. In other words, bring it in just as if the rule had been entered here. So let's have a look at that in browser, and there we go. We have, let's look at the rule down here, color equals red, font size 3 EM, font family Arial. Let's have a look at changing this file, for example, so that the font color should be blue, and then reloading up here, and there you go. So we didn't change the import styles document at all, just the CSS file that's referred to by it. Another way that you can import a CSS style sheet file is using the link command as shown in import styles2.htm. So for example here, there's the link tag, and it's a self-closing tag, so you can see the slash angle bracket at the end. So we say link rel equals style sheet, and the type equals text CSS, and the href, in other words the URL to fetch, is styles.css. So here we go, there's import styles 2, and here's the matching tab showing that file here. It's showing red at the moment because the CSS file previously had said color red, but if we hit reload here, there you are, it's showing the blue. And just to show it's working again, we'll change this to a different font, for example Korean New, and we'll reload there, and you can see the new fonts come up. Okay, now that's importing styles, but there's also another way that you can put styles into your web documents, and that's by embedding them. So have a look here. Here's another simple document. This is embedded styles.htm in the downloaded archive, and as you can see, it's got the standard HTML/HTML tags, the head and the body, and in the title here, embedded styles. And there's no styles anywhere as we've seen before, either from the style tags or from an import or from a link loading, but what we have here instead is the style equal attribute of the H1 tag. So here what's happening is the H1 tag is being opened, and then it's being set specifically to the style here, which is font style of italic, color of blue. Let's see what that looks like in the browser. There you are, font style italic, color blue. We could put another rule in here. For example, font family impact, and let's take a look at that, save it and reload here, and the font has been changed, and this is directly embedding styles into HTML. It's not a good idea, because once you start doing this, you start to remove the separation between the layout and the styling and the content, so that for example, if you have your content just saved as text and some style tags such as H1, H2, H3 and then italics and so on, you can have a separate style sheet to display that in any way you like, or for example to play a web page using audio, using speech synthesis, or whatever way you'd like to output it at all. But once you start embedding styles like this into your elements, then you're starting to remove that separation, and it gets a lot harder to apply style sheets to reformat content for lots of different purposes. But anyway, sometimes you need to do this, and there are valid reasons, and so now you know how to do it. Okay, a couple of other ways of embedding styles into a document are to use IDs and classes, and these are the recommended ways to do it. What you do, you take your standard web page, again HTML5 doc type, and your opening and closing HTML tags and everything. But here we've got something slightly different in the style section here. We've got a rule beginning with a hash, or a pound sign, as it's also known, and then the name UOrange. In this case, UOrange stands for underlined orange, and the rule you can see is text decoration, set that to underline, and set the color to orange. And what this hash UOrange does is it says wherever the ID with the name of UOrange is, apply this rule. So for example, here is an H1 tag, and it has the ID UOrange, so the tag should be applied. So let's see what happens looking in the Opera browser. And there you have it. It's orange text and it's underlined. And what's happening here is, rather than specifically embedding a style in the H1 tag, we're just giving it an ID. And now in the style section, without changing any of the textual content here, we can just change the rule that applies to that ID. For example, color to pink, for example. And let's have a look at how that displays, and there you are. So that's with an ID. Now, IDs apply only to a single element. So this is the only element that should have the ID of UOrange. You shouldn't use it anywhere else in the document, and if you do, generally, except for a couple of unusual circumstances, it will just be ignored when all subsequent occurrences will just be ignored, because the HTML, when working on IDs, is only going to deal with the first occurrence it finds. To overcome that, you have classes, and here you can see the rule begins with a dot or a period, and what this does is the same as the ID, but it applies to all elements that use the class. So here, a purple, which in this case I'm using to stand for an Arial font in purple, and the class H1 a purple, hello there. So let's look at the using classes HTML file, and there you are. That's in Arial and it's in purple. Okay, so let's recap a little here, and we'll go back to the start. First of all, the example.html file just shows you the basic structure of an HTML document with which to compare the other examples that follow. And then we looked at the style tag, which is the simplest way of embedding a style in a document. You put your rules within the style, opening and closing tags, and then they get applied. And then we looked at external style sheets, for example here this one, styles.css. And then we looked at different ways of importing those. Firstly, within the style tags, using the @import URL command, and then using link rel equals style sheet. Okay, so those are two different ways of importing your styles from an external document. And then we looked at embedding styles, and the first and most discouraged way is embedding the styles directly in to a tag, which I really don't recommend unless there's no way you can avoid doing so. And then the preferred methods of using IDs and classes. Now, IDs are unique, so an ID is the identity of a single element, and that's what you're referring to here, a single element there. And classes apply to a range of elements that can use or apply the particular class that you give. A couple of other things to point out here just before we close this particular walkthrough. When there's no dot or hash at the front of a rule, then it applies directly to a tag name, in this case H1. So you can see there, and we'll have a look before here. There you are. Just used directly there. That applies to the tag itself. When embedded in a document, of course, embedded in an element, it applies directly to that element. Or you can use the hash or the period to decide whether an element should be applied to an ID, as the hash does, or the period here, whether it should apply to a class.